Since you clicked on this video, I'm going to make a bold assumption. Your dream indie game is stuck in development hell. Let me guess, you're drowning in tasks, you're battling scope creep that just keeps rearing its ugly head, and you are wondering to yourself, how are you ever going to actually finish this game and get it shipped? You pour your heart and soul into your creation, but the path to shipping just feels impossible. Now, what if I told you we could take a peek behind the curtain at a studio that has consistently shipped beloved hits like Guacamelee 1 and 2, and nobody saves the world?
From my time at Drinkbox, I would say there's a pervasive philosophy of focusing on good enough for now.
Well, friend, today we are doing just that. Join me as I talk with associate producer Josh Davis over at Drinkbox Studios.
I say obviously. I don't know if this is common or not. I feel like it should be because it's so important.
As he breaks down their structured yet flexible approach to production, things like how they leverage playtesting and the mindset required to get games across the finish line.
That's the worst case scenario that you're trying to avoid at all costs.
You will leave with actionable production secrets, processes, and frameworks that will allow you to finally ship that game. Welcome to Freaking Cool Indies. All right, welcome to Freaking Cool Indies, Josh. And first off, thank you very much for jumping on and talking with us today about production and the Drinkbox way, the Drinkbox approach to production, and you coming from both a QA and now working as an associate producer at Drinkbox. I wanted to first just set the scene to maybe walk our listeners through, like, what is a producer? And again, I am very positive that most people listening are in fact producers. They just might not know about it. So maybe walk us through, what is a producer? What do you do? What are your responsibilities? And yeah, that whole thing there.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I feel like a question that I have to navigate a lot whenever I talk to anyone outside of the industry as well. But like, yeah, what is it that I do? I feel like the short answer I tend to give a lot of people is project management, right? It's trying to make sure that there is sort of like an overarching timeline, an overarching process to go through. You have like the start and end date in mind, and you're building out the steps to get there. That's largely, I would say, the job of a producer in any role, in every industry even. It's like trying to get from the start to the finish. It's the same at Drinkbox. It's a lot of coordinating with different departments, trying to make sure that they're working on the right things as well, and trying to make sure they're working on those things for the right amount of time. There's a lot of time boxing and making sure everything is happening in a timely manner, because again, you're trying to get that finish line, and you don't want anything to suddenly pop out of the woodwork and be like, oh my gosh, now everything's going to be pushed back like several months. That's the worst case scenario that you're trying to avoid at all costs. But yeah, the job, I would say, is also anticipating and listening to these new things that come up, these things that do pop out, and all of a sudden trying to like make a game plan out of that. Yeah, it's really a lot of planning, a lot of talking to people and keeping things on track.
Very cool. And I'm guessing, like, within Drinkbox, you're working with the entirety of the team, from music to art and design, and kind of having everyone working together, because you're trying to check off those boxes, and in most cases build those boxes of, okay, in this next sprint, this is what we need to do. This is what's going on in each of the facets. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah, that is fairly accurate. I think we do borrow a bit from like the agile work structure. I don't think we're super strict about it, but we have our monthly-ish milestones, and we have like the things we're doing every milestone. We have our scrums, sort of, again, as I'm sure it happens in any company, we're modifying them a bit to suit our needs. But yeah, also I would say Drinkbox has kind of like a couple of producers, of which I'm one, and so I help in some of these departments more so than others. Right now, I tend to be more involved with like SFX stuff, some music production. I help in some like general planning for I would say the art and design departments. Yeah, that's, I guess, mostly my role. I don't get too into the nitty-gritty with the art and design, but I am there for like the overall picture type of stuff.
Very cool. And how many producers are there in total at Drinkbox?
I would say 3. Including myself. I said that with a bit of a question mark because being a small studio, we are wearing different hats. There's Graham and Ryan that also help with a lot of that. Very much producers doing very much the same tasks. I would say Chris is also more of a producer on the code side of things. Yeah, so 3-ish, 4, and especially what does end up happening is we do have like a structure hierarchy at Drinkbox as much as we are, I would say, what feels like a surprisingly democratic studio. Like, we don't have just one person that's like really running the boat at any given point in time. There's always a lot of decisions being made and a lot of people giving their input on those decisions. That being said, yeah, we have the founders of the studio that do meet up quite regularly, and they're like, okay, just checking in, making sure we're all on the same page for what we're working on and how we're going to keep working on things.
And are these conversations happening on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? Is it after kind of each sprint?
They are happening quite frequently, possibly too frequently, as some people would suggest. But yeah, to break it down, I believe the founders meet up, I want to say 2 to 3 times a week, not for very long, but just to touch base, go over any high priority things that have come up that would affect the entire project, of which they usually aren't a lot, but they're making like those key business decisions. Outside of that, we tend to meet up for like production and marketing planning on a weekly basis. And that's when we are talking about things with a bit more granularity, talking about more specific tasks, I would say. And then we are meeting up maybe twice a week to talk to at least the art and design departments about like the things that they're working on, the progress that they've made, reviewing their stuff. And those departments as well, like, they have their own meetings during the week. We have like, the lead of our art leads, our design leads, and they are also having their own meetings that I want to say happen maybe once or twice a week, depending on the department. And those are separate from the official meetings with producers. But yeah, they're also meeting up with their team and talking through. That's like almost like the lowest level of meeting in terms of like it's down to like all those details. And then of course beyond that, everyone's just working on their own stuff. So yeah, quite a few meetings.
Lots of meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of meetings. Let's just say you guys better like each other because you're definitely spending quite a bit of time with one another.
Yeah, I honestly would say that is a big part of it, right? Like we do see each other a lot, and one of the reasons I feel lucky for working at Drinkbox is having worked at a variety of other places. This really does feel like everyone's just kind of got a good mindset. It's a super rare thing I find to work to be in a workplace and be like, yeah, I get along with everyone here. Not that, we're all like best of buddies and like hanging out all the time. Some of us, sure, we do that. But in general, there's just like a good work culture, we understand how to talk to each other. There's no big egos, anything like that. It really is a nice place to work with lots of good people to talk to that are all very nice people.
That's so important, especially in a creative world that is game creation, right? Like being able to have the psychological safety of, I think we should change this, or this is my thought on X, Y, and Z, and not having people just shoot it down, but letting the team be able to jump in and either add to it or change it or tweak it. But having that conversation, I think, is so very important to get to the best product possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would also say that the frequency of meetings, I do feel like that helps minimize how big or impactful some things end up being. I'm trying to find a good way of phrasing this, but because we meet up so frequently and we talk about things so frequently and we're getting lots of feedback from people, nothing's ever a surprise. You're not like going off to work on something for like multiple weeks, coming to show it to someone and being like, what is this? I don't know what this is. I never asked for it. I don't want anything to do with this thing. Like that's not happening, right? Because we're checking in very frequently, there's always like course corrections that are happening constantly. And that just helps make sure like everyone's on the same page. There isn't anything that comes out of the blue that ends up surprising us in an unpleasant way.
And I guess for our listeners, or maybe some of our listeners who don't have a whole team and they're not running multiple meetings a week with various people, when you kind of think about not just what you've seen, but also when you're working on either your own projects, things like that, like Do you have any tips of how you would maybe scale that down to a singular person or maybe two people team of not just like, okay, we're working together on this one thing, but how to scope that or how to make a structure for oneself to be able to just like check in with themselves?
I would say that you have to meet up at least once a week in almost any endeavor. That's like the bare minimum, really. Even if you're working on things yourself, obviously you're the only person in that meeting. You kind of are aware of everything that's happening. But it's good to check in with yourself and be like, hey, what am I working on? What are these timelines? Because it's easy to lose track of that if you haven't actually made that plan. But yeah, anything larger than one person, definitely you got to meet up at least once a week to touch base with everyone. At some point, you get enough people, maybe around 4 or 5 people, that you're like, okay, maybe a second meeting where we're like checking in with everyone just to make sure we're again like course correcting with like reasonable frequency. I'll also say this experience that I'm trying to talk about is I'm also drawing from some of the theatrical background that I've had. We're like, helping produce a show of like, 10, 12-ish people. Still having those weekly meetings is super useful for making sure everyone knows what's happening. We're collecting all the tasks that we need to get done. And yeah, it just helps you really, how to say it? Assign tasks in a timely manner, in a way that feels fair to everyone that's involved in the project as well. Like, if you meet up every week, you're aware of like, okay, I've given 5 tasks to this person, 5 tasks to this person, and then it comes to next week, you're like, okay, we've checked all those tasks now, like, and you're keeping that task list reasonably fresh. You're going through it frequently, so nothing's ever surprising you. You're not coming to something 2 weeks later and being like, oh, crap, now we have 50 different tasks that we need to assign to like 3 different people, right? I know I'm doing a lot of advocating here for a lot of planning, but obviously there is the flip side of the coin where you can end up over planning and not actually doing much else, and that's something to be aware of. I would say, as long as you had that first meeting, as long as you have a deadline that you're trying to reach, you can evaluate as well that, okay, we're doing all these meetings, but in all these meetings, we're taking time away from these other tasks. And because of that, these tasks that we've set a certain amount of time for, like they're taking longer. And like that's a good indication, like, okay, let's scale back. Let's figure out if these meetings are actually necessary and give our people a bit more time to work on things on their own so that they can get through some stuff faster. Bit of a balancing act.
Definitely. And I'm guessing that also shifts depending on what stage of the game you're at, right? If you're in prototyping stage, if you guys are still trying to figure out what is the core mechanics, the core concept, whatever it is of the game, right? I'm sure there's quite a bit of more meetings that maybe it's like, all right, we know exactly what we're working, we know what people need to do, and like now we can kind of trudge ahead with maybe a little bit fewer meetings, but now it's maybe more intentional.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I'm trying to think about what we've done in the studio as well. Sorry, it's a bit weird because we don't fully go into okay, now we're brainstorming and trying new things. There's always something that like some of the team is working on. There's like support for the games we've already made, right? There's bringing things to other platforms. Like those things do take time, and it's nice to be busy while we're working on some of those more prototypey stages of development. But yeah, no, it definitely does change throughout the project. I would actually say even the opposite is true, that like the further on you go in development, all of a sudden it becomes more important to have more meetings, because now you're like going through these list of polished tasks. Now you've probably scaled up the studio a little bit to like make sure you're getting to those deadlines, and you really want to be sure that the right things are being worked on. I say this from experience that especially as we're getting close to the deadline, there is a lot more scrutiny of what are we working on before this game gets finished. Because the reality of it is that a game is rarely complete when it's released. There's always going to be things that you wanted to work on. There's always going to be those little things that you wanted to add. And sometimes you need to sacrifice those things in order to make sure the game works. And that's, what we focus on doing. So yeah, later on is when we tend to scale up, when we tend to have a few more meetings. The middle of the project, I think, is when we tend to enter like a flow state. That's when we realize we know how many meetings we're having a week. We know what we're talking about. We know the frequency of them. Early on in the project, I would say it feels a bit more sporadic.
Very cool. And first, from like a more of like a maybe a flexibility standpoint, is there a point in time? Because obviously, I think as the game is developing, there's a lot of room for what's the word? Creativity, maybe is a word, or does it
Yeah.
get to a point where it's kind of like, hey, we don't have time for that anymore? And even going back to what you were talking about of having to chop some things that maybe you do want to do just for the sake of time. Yeah, like I don't know, maybe walk me through a bit more on the flexibility side of things. I think when people hear about structure, I think the what they typically hear is like, oh, structure means no flexibility, right? And kind of
Yeah.
structure sometimes doesn't mean creativity. And if you have any experience on that standpoint.
Yeah, no, this is a topic that there's certainly a lot to talk about, right? Yeah, I would say that at Drinkbox, we tend to give people time, space to do their own things, but we do also time box things, right? We do have to make sure that the project is going along. We have to make sure that we're not entering the point of diminishing returns, right? The other thing that I'll say is that before you kind of have that first level, that test level, that vertical slice, it's a lot harder to structure things. Once you have that first level, that first core concept, then it becomes a lot easier to scope things out, to give people the time that they need. Try and exemplify this. Um, you know, Initially it is tougher at the start to figure out like how much time do we want to spend on level design, on concept art, on making sure these mechanics feel good. And I would say at Drinkbox we really focus on getting that minimal viable product, like making sure it's working, making sure we can test it, we can start getting feedback. And then once we've done that, we've already kind of stumbled onto like, okay, that level took this long to make. That art, that decision process took us this long to make. And yeah, those mechanics took this long to tune. And so we take that and then really we extrapolate and we're like, okay, let's say we want to release the game in 2 years, right? And now it took us 2 weeks. I'm going to stumble on the math. I will not be able to. But yeah, you took 2 weeks to make that level. You have 2 years to make a game. So that's like,
Yep.
divide the amount of time you have by the amount of weeks it took to make a level. And hey, that's how many levels you're going to make. That's like, the simplest way of making that timeline. And, part of the creation process is giving yourself some buffer for those things that don't go according to plan. Yes, you've given yourself, let's say you give yourself 3 weeks to make a level now. Sometimes there might be a level that comes along that ends up taking 4 weeks. And you're like, okay, we need to stop working on this and go to this, continue working the project. We'll come back to this later. So really, I would say the way we kind of come to those decisions is by focusing on like what's good enough for now. Sorry, I'm also trying to keep like this is me trying to like.
No, this is great. This again, I think there's so many different ways of double clicking. Like what is good enough? What is an MVP basically for the team, but also for someone who might be a small team, a solo dev, whatever that looks like. It's like, okay, cool. Like I think that also helps so much with scope and for them to be able to scope out for themselves of like, this is how long I would take because most likely I have a job and a family or whatever your other areas are. And then allowing you to now have a way more accurate timeline to not burn yourself out because it's like, this is what I've allotted to. This is, we'll give time to do this and that. But again, I think there's basically keep going is what I'm trying to get at, because I think as you kind of talk more, it unfolds a lot of different areas and a lot of different other questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, yeah, to try give space to creativity. I don't. It's also a balancing act. It's a constant balancing act. We have moments of testing out an idea, coming up with concepts, and we get feedback on that. And now we're like, okay, let's go back to that drawing board and like see how we're developing those ideas and like what are the new results. And I don't know if I have a good equation for saying like, okay, this is how many times you want to iterate before you stop, right? But it definitely does happen. You definitely need some iteration. You definitely need to give people some space to come up with those ideas. We need to give them feedback again. fairly frequently. Yeah, I'm trying to think about how this would work for a smaller studio as well. Yeah, I would say maybe compartmentalization really helps, like giving yourself a set amount of time to focus on creation, giving yourself a set amount of time on feedback, and then thinking about like, okay, do we need to go back to this? Do I need to spend more time on this? And if I do, what does that mean for the project as well? It's good to give space, but again, my producer brain is constantly like putting out these flags, being like, you can't keep working on things forever. Yeah,
Absolutely. You gotta ship eventually, right?
yeah, that's a challenge.
And from like maybe a data perspective, playtest, whatever we want to call it, is this happening just throughout? Like I'm from gathering is nothing's very linear, right? Like you're kind of creating something new. What I'm guessing is playtesting it internally, coming back, reiterating on it, continue that process until it initially hits an external maybe playtest of someone coming in, or what does that look like? But yeah, walk me through maybe more of the data collecting and playtesting side, and how that also changes around decisions and helps makes decisions.
Sure. Yeah, I would say data collecting. I know you mentioned playtesting as like one specific example, but I'd also like to eventually go into the tangent of the fact that it's really everywhere in the studio. It's affecting everything. But yeah, in terms of collecting data for testing, I will say that initially there isn't a lot of data collection that is done by playtesting. For a lot of the time, the games we're making, a lot of their lifetime is getting to that, getting to the state of like, okay, we have our alpha, we can play a game from start to end. That is, I would say, like 75% of our game's lifetime in development. And during that lifetime, we aren't doing a lot of tests. We probably will eventually have like a vertical slice or a demo whenever we have, and I think maybe once a milestone, so once every month or so, we have one person from the team kind of like walk through that demo. And that's just to make sure like everything's working, that the tutorials make sense. But yeah, we don't have a lot of testing with like multiple people. It's just one person a milestone, if that even. In the middle of the milestones, in the middle of development, when you've got those early tests down and you're like, okay, now I know what I need to focus on in order to get to that alpha, then I feel like we tend to have even less testing. And just because we're trying to get to the point of getting to that alpha, because that's when we would start getting real important feedback.
And what about more from the prototype perspective? As you come up with these different ideas and mechanics and what the game would be, are you using your internal resources to figure out, is this fun or not? Or or are you using playtesting or, things along those lines to collect that information?
I would say that it is primarily an internal task of like figuring out if what we're working on is fun. Part of that is because as well, and this might differ from studio to studio, is like we want to work on, I guess the shortest way of saying is like we want to work on the things that we want to make, right? And so it's not just about what some other people might find fun. This is primarily early on, right? Like when you're working on a prototype, it's easy to show that to someone outside and be like, why isn't this more like Dark Souls? Why isn't this more like Super Mario Odyssey or something, right? Because it's such a bare bones product that it's easy to extrapolate to any kind of game that you can see it being in the future. But yeah, initially I would say during the prototype phase, we have like pitches that end up being what we decide to make, and those pitches have ideas for like, okay, what is this game trying to be? What is this game gonna feel like to play? And so we use that. We go into these and we go to these like prototyping sessions, and everyone knows like, okay, these are the references. This is what we're trying, the feeling that we're trying to create. And initially it's just an internal task. As we're developing these prototypes, we're like, okay, how does it feel to do this? Does that make sense? Does it feel like it's strayed from our original goals? Is it keeping up with our original goals but still not being fun? Is there something we can change to do that? So yeah, there's like a lot of reacting to that internal play testing as well, but initially it is very internal, just trying to make sense of it ourselves. And I'll also say, admittedly, I feel like I mentioned earlier that like Drinkbox is a bit more democratic in that sense that like we have a lot of people giving feedback. And that can, sometimes work to our detriment as well. As much as it is a very collaborative experience, it means that in moments of creating these prototypes, we don't just have a single person motivating exactly what a game needs to be. And that means sometimes you go a couple of steps in one direction, catering it to one person's feedback, and then a couple of steps in another direction, catering it to another person's feedback. And eventually, and I don't know, this might just be the magic of Drinkbox, but eventually we get to a point where we're like, okay, we've tried all these different ways. Let's hammer down in this way. So it's like from all these different branching paths, through that iteration, we're slowly chipping away and realizing, okay, yes, it's possible to make the game fun that way. Yes, it's possible to make the game fun that way. But this is like the specific way that we're trying to make the game fun. This is what we think will have the most options, the most, the most we can add or expand on, So it is like a bit of a slow internal process.
Very cool. So then I guess if playtesting doesn't come out for the first, let's call it 75% of just keeping it simple, then what is the data that the team is typically looking at and kind of using to make those informed decisions?
When I said that 75% is no playtesting, I meant more so like no external testing, no like huge testing. I think I mentioned it's like just once a milestone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. The data that we're collecting for the most part, let's see, depending on the game that we're making, I guess it kind of depends. It depends on the game we're making. Obviously, if it's a game that's more strategy focused, we're trying to see like what are interesting decisions that people are making. Are people actually interacting with the decisions or the mechanics in the way that we want them to, right? Or are they just finding that kind of like cheap way of just like, one-shotting all the enemies by just doing this one thing from a corner? Yeah, like how are they interacting with the game? How often are they dying? How often when are they leveling up, right? And this is, I will say, it's like, it's also important from a planning perspective. One of the tangents for like how we use data is it's very ingrained in how we do a lot of our game design as well. Like we have, I've seen spreadsheets of like, these are how many enemy types we're going to have in a level. This is how many of those enemies we're going to have. This is how much XP we're going to get from those enemies. And what that ends up doing is like, you now have an equation for like, okay, the player is going to level up this many times in a level, right? And yes, that's all good in a spreadsheet, but you do actually need to test that in a level. Playtime is important to us as well, and we're looking at like, okay, we want to keep things dense, we want to keep things fun, and like we can only do so much theory testing in terms of like, we'll draw a quick sketch for a level, right? And we will literally do this and be like, okay, this is the kind of like white box plan for the level. We'll draw like a little path, we'll draw a little maze, we'll say like, okay, there's going to be enemy encounter here, and this whole level is going to take you 20 minutes to get through. And, that's just in theory. Eventually, we use these milestone-ish playtests to be like, okay, is that accurate? Are they taking that long? Do we need to course correct here? Because like that boss fight took them like 15 attempts. That's way too many attempts. What can we do to correct that? So yeah, we're using these internal playtests to temperature check some of the larger design decisions that we're making. We're not making sweeping changes, but again, like we're massaging things. We're being like, okay, that level took 25 minutes. Let's see if we wanted it to be 15, so let's make it 15. That boss battle took way too many attempts. Let's like reduce the boss's health, or like change, or like, was there something in particular that was constantly killing the players? There's something we can do about that. So again, just these like frequent temperature checks, course corrections that help us make sure we're staying on the right track.
Very cool. And are you, when another another member of the team is doing these play tests and you're collecting the data from it, are you When we're talking data, are you looking at just like watching them play and looking at it from that perspective? Or is it actually like, hey, at this section, they died 8 times. And like at the other section, or like the last time someone played, they died 9 times. So it's like, again, do we maybe make that a little bit easier?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. There is for some playtests we have people watching, and depending on the metrics that we care most about for the game, that's like what we're logging with time, or like the person watching would log with time. Like let's say for Nobody Saves the World, it's like okay, it took like they only unlocked a new form X minutes from when they started, or their first death was X minutes from like at this point in time. That's just like yeah, just visually checking that. But we do obviously also have. I say obviously. I don't know if this is common or not. I feel like it should be because it's so important. But we do have a system of uh, keeping track of events that happen in the game, and that gets spat out at the end of a session, being like, okay, yeah, and this is like computer generated. The player died at exactly this time. They used this ability this many times, and now we're aggregating that, put into a spreadsheet, and now we have like a heat map of oh yeah, these are the abilities that players really like using, and these are the ones that they don't. So yeah, it's a bit of both. Again, there's a lot of data that gets gathered.
Very, very cool. And is it the job of the producer to sift that data, or is there other members of the team, or is it an entire team collaboration effort?
Again, a bit of both, a bit of all, I should say. I would say the producers definitely take a first look at things, organize things, gather the most important feedback, and like, okay, yeah, these are the things we want to focus on. But they're also sectioning them off to talk to the like the designers, artists, the coders for like their own meetings as well.
Yeah.
So yes, we're doing some of the sifting, but really like we trust our departments as well, right? Like I would definitely not look at when player is dying and be like, oh yeah, designers, maybe we need to make the game easier. Like not my area of expertise.
Very cool.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely trust them, and they're also informing us on what kind of information that they want to gather, and like that goes into the logging, that goes into making sure, like, okay, yeah, we need to make sure we're gathering that data. We need to make sure we're asking the right questions. Sorry, I forgot to mention. Sometimes these playtests, and often these playtests, will end with a little questionnaire of like some of the things that we care about, and that helps us inform us of like the player's feelings, which can surprisingly be different from what the raw data from their playthrough actually would suggest.
Gotcha. Yeah, like a person dying a million times and then afterwards being like, that was great.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly. It's important to get that because sometimes you're like, oh, maybe it is fine that the players are dying constantly.
And for like you had mentioned there, but like you guys definitely seem to double down on the metrics that you care about. Is that something when do those, let's call them North Star metrics, if you will, when does that come as part of this your the whole production cycle and being like, okay, this like with nobody saves the world, like I'm guessing some different ones would be the rate of people completing challenges or the rate of people unlocking new abilities, right? Like that's, I'm guessing, what would be something in that data realm of how fast or how slow are things happening, and maybe let's pull some levers to speed up or slow down those different aspects.
100%. That's pretty much exactly how it happens as well. You have the initial things you care about. Um, you have the fact that like, okay, you want a player to unlock these forms this frequently. And so that's the first metric that you start caring about. And then you get data and you're like, okay, this is either taking too long or it's happening too fast. So now you course correct, and now you introduce this other mechanic. It's like, let's say, and I think this is what happened in Nobody Saves the World. We locked certain forms from being able to rank up further. Basically, you have to try a bunch of different forms before you can like focus on one form. We don't let you unlock a form and immediately take it to the max rank. Like you have to diversify, right? And that was a course correction. And the thing is, like, when you do that course correction, you now have to gather data on that course correction. You're like, okay, are people actually interacting with this? Are they actually trying out new forms? Are they having a good time? Are they intrinsically trying out all these new things, or are they only doing it when they are forced to? Right? And so like that now becomes like another, like a minor North Star of sorts. It's like it's like a reactionary star that appeared because you had your first metric, you're reacting to it, now you have a new one. And that's, I would say, really how a lot of development in Drinkbox goes. Like we have the initial feeling that we want to create, we have that initial game, and then it's all about like adding these little systems, these little tweaks, and getting feedback on them. And every milestone, that's like, oh, there's another thing we've added. How has that actually affected the course correction? Did it get us back on track? Did it get us to where we want to go?
Okay, so even something like that, where at the start of Nobody Says, it's like someone could just level up the rat, let's just say, right? But I'm guessing that wouldn't fall into the, let's call it, unexpected game development time that is left, because you guys are just working and you're kind of working together so frequently on it that it probably got called out fairly early on of like, we need to figure out a way of making people try or at least unlock all of the different forms and then start to build them up.
Yeah, I would say like sometimes it's surprising how late in development stuff like that can happen. I mean, for like half of the project, we were so sure we were gonna have equipable equipment in the game, and there were these items that you could equip. You could find them in the world, doing all those various quests, and that was like halfway through the game, and then decided not to. We're like, it doesn't actually add much. It complicates things. It makes certain forms and abilities like overpowered, and then we see people being like, okay, once they've unlocked that item, that's all they're using, that's all they're doing. And like there were items that were strictly goods. They're just adding them onto every single thing. And in a way, I wouldn't say we even necessarily solve that problem. There are definitely some, using Nobody Saves the World as an example, there are definitely some abilities that everyone puts onto every single build. And again, we do our best to try account for these different scenarios, but oftentimes there's only so much you can do.
Absolutely, and especially in that style of game, right? It's it's more or less an ARPG, and people are gonna min-max their way of figuring out what is the best way of making my like horse super awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's awesome. So I like when something like that happens, and let's just keep playing on this. Like, okay, 50% of the way, a fairly large shift is going to happen, like from both a mindset perspective, but even a scope perspective. Like, does the team just like now we only have X amount of time before what we think is the launch, and this new finding kind of like changes everything? Like what goes on after that?
Yeah. I'll say that I know I use that equipment as like one of the more drastic examples, but funnily enough, I think it's an example of something that sounds more drastic than it is. And I say that because since we have meetings so frequently, at least in like the last couple of projects that I've worked on with Drinkbox, there never really has been something that came in as such of with a huge shock of like, okay, we need to rethink things entirely. This changes everything that we're doing. I can even think of an example that we were working on recently where we had like that 2-week time frame to work on something. And at the end of that 2 weeks, we were like, okay, like we need to evaluate this now, because that's when we were going to evaluate it. And that's when we said we would evaluate it. And it wasn't ready for that evaluation. And we were like, okay, we do need to get this level done. And so let's finish it, let's make it work. Well, like we'll close the box on that and come back to it in a little while. And part of that is like also figuring out like, okay, is giving ourselves time to figure out how we're going to deal with that. And I would say that at the time, we do have meetings to be like, okay, what happened there? Why did that take so long? What can we do to course correct? What can we do? Like, what were the things that happened that made that thing go longer than it did? And what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Oftentimes, it just comes down to stricter time boxing. Sometimes it is a specific design tool or something that was just like a lot harder to work with than anticipated. So maybe we need someone to tweak the engine, tweak the tools in order to make those tools easier to use. But because we're having those meetings frequently, it's rarely ever something that has major impacts down the line, especially if we've given ourselves like a little bit of breathing room, which we tend to do. Yeah, these changes or like reacting to them tends to be smaller, tends to be pretty self-contained. Yeah, we don't let it get to that point of it being like a huge change. And I will also add, there are definitely things that happen from time to time where like, okay, we could do this. We could make Nobody Saves the World have a Breath of the Wild style like system where you can like magnetize stuff and like that would make the game better. But like we can't do it, you know? We don't have time. And we do make those decisions. I wouldn't say frequently, but we're aware of the things that would just balloon things out of proportion. And more often that I would say that at Drinkbox especially, we tend to be on the more cautious side of things.
So when you move it to the save it for the sequel like box, and you're just like, all right, done.
Yeah. More often than not, save it for the DLC.
Or exactly that. Save it for the DLC, being like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. And it's just like, yes, not right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I guess from like a scope and being able to take that step back and understand, okay, again, yes, but not right now, or let's implement it. Does that help feature creep? Where it's kind of like, okay, because I know what needs to be done, but there's all these things that we can do, and you know, project creep or feature creep or whatever you want to call it is very real, especially in the games industry, and obviously it leads to a lot of burnout. It leads, I think, even just like scope creep in general leads to a lot of small indies giving up on their project because, you know, it starts small and they get working on it and then they don't think it's big enough to ship, and, you know, and they kind of just keep building and building, and then it's just like, you know what, forget it. Like, I don't want to do this at all anymore. So let's maybe talk through a little bit about that. Again, if we want to focus on projects creep, feature creep, scope creep, any form of creep that we want to dig into.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely felt that myself when working on personal projects. Right. It's particularly devastating when you're working on your own, is what I'll say, is because like you very rarely have that other person to help like bounce, like get that context off of. It's like, yeah, no, things are getting out of control. Once you have a few more people, yes, you tend to have a few more ideas, but then you also have the advantage of like, if you're a producer, you have the advantage of hearing all those ideas and using them to figure out like, okay, these are actually the things that we want to work on. So it gets a bit easier in that sense. I would say at Drinkbox, scope creep is an interesting problem. I'm trying to think of like if we really feel it, because yes, there's definitely features we want to add. There's definitely things that we would want to add to all of our games. And how do we deal with it? I feel like we deal with it by starting small. You know, we constantly chip away at things instead of going full tilt into like a new feature. One example of scope creep is we initially were going to have each form in Nobody Saves the World was going to have its own unique look for every rank that it leveled up, which like we have like 20 different forms or something, and they each have five ranks or something like that. So now we are creating like 100 different characters, right? And that was something we were like, okay, yeah, we can't do that, right? And that I'm trying to think of how we caught that. I think it was just a matter of seeing how much time it took to make a form, seeing how much time it took to create all these other forms. And again, because you have that timeline and you're like, okay, yeah, if we keep doing this, if we just extrapolate that out, we have this many forms, it takes this much time to make. Like, you can't do that, right? Yeah. So one of the examples.
It would have been cool to see a level 5 super rat.
That's one of the ones we had. It would like go through all these like various mutations. It become like a scientist. It would have like ears on its back and all sorts of crazy things. Yeah,
that's super wicked. One day in one of those coffee table books, you know, the untold stories of Drinkbox Studio, and have all the art in there. That's very, very cool. And I guess like any other advice for a solo dev on, especially when it comes to features that they want to keep, but you know, they've done the math and it's like, all right, things aren't adding up and maybe we do need to cut it, and just how the team handles those hard decisions of a rock in a hard place of, you know, there's two great ideas, there's two things that we love to do, and one of them's kind of got to go.
Yeah, I feel like if one of them's got to go, it's easy to make the decision, and like one of them just goes. But I want to focus in because you said like, you know, you have your deadline, but you have this feature that you know you really want to, that you feel like makes your game. I want to focus in on that because that feels like an interesting example, and my answer feels odd, but my initial response that appeared in my head as soon as you said that was that your game shouldn't get to that point. It's kind of how we work at Drinkbox, is that we start off with like what we want our game to be, right? Like, and this is before we have our deadline, before we have when exactly we want to release our game. We spend a couple of months prototyping this idea, figuring out like what we want to make. From then on, once we have that core level, right? And this is what I would suggest smaller developers do, and myself to do as well, is to create that core level, create that. I would hesitate in calling it like a full vertical slice, but you want to make that proof of concept. You want to have something you can show to someone and be like, this is the core of the game. And it might not be great, it might not even be fun to play at that point. It might have lots of problems, but it is what the core of your game is. From then on, once you have that core, that's when you're like, okay, it took me this long to make this and design these things, and now you can like figure out when your release date is, work back from there, and like you have your plan. Everything else that happens in between, every kind of like reaction that you make, and this is trying to talk from experience at Drinkbox as well. We have that core idea. We're constantly reacting to the design decisions we're making and what the feedback is giving us. And you are massaging it, you are making it better. And eventually the game has to release as well. There might be a point where you feel like, okay, there's a feature that we could add that would fix everything. That feels like almost like an impossible situation to even occur, because you've been testing, because you've been trying, because you've been working on it and reacting to things constantly. It's rare to come across something and be like, yeah, that would fix everything. But I remember even, I think with Nobody Saves the World, there was a point where you're like, okay, cool, that would change mana works, could help things, but given the point of the project, it's not going to fix everything, right? Like it's again, diminishing returns. You have to ship your game, and you're just going to ship it with it being the best that it can be. Yeah, I would say that it's super rare, and it shouldn't happen that you get to the point where you're like, oh, there's this one thing that I could do that would fix everything. That shouldn't really happen.
That should pop up probably a little bit sooner, or be part of the earlier process of the iteration cycle.
And I think that's part of testing as well, right? You're getting feedback from people, and these people are telling you, like, oh, like, I liked what this game did, or how it worked here, or like, I like this mechanic, or I would like to see things work in this way. Like, your constant testing gives you that information to avoid something appearing out of nowhere. Like, oh yeah, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, and I know with playtesting, because I know we talked about playtesting, we didn't dive too deep into it, but when you guys do get to the point of, external playtesters are coming in, people who haven't just spent the last 2 or 3 years on this game, in this game, what does that process look like? Both of like, how are you guys finding testers, but also, I think more importantly, when you are collecting this feedback, how do you know what to action on and what to kind of not? And or are you just kind of, how do you stay true to your own creative vision, but then also making sure that you're hearing these players and making those necessary tweaks?
I would say the first thing that we look when we're getting playtesters, I will say it's important for us that we're getting the right playtesters as well. You're not getting a wholesome game player to play like the most difficult Souls-like type experience. That's not going to end well for anyone. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe that's the niche you're trying to fill. Maybe you're trying to make a cozy Souls-like. But yeah, typically, you know what kind of game you're going to make, and you know what kind of people you would want to play it. And so as we're getting playtesters in, as we like put out an open call even, generally we tend to start internally asking people in the team, like, if they know someone that like plays the style of game that we're trying to make. And even as we get playtesters, we ask them to fill out forms being like, okay, what kind of games do you like? How often do they finish these games? How often do they play? Like, are they like, we ask players to like try categorize themselves, really. So then, we do these play tests where we have these logs, these automated logs that are happening that are telling us like exactly how they played. After they have their play test, we typically have interviews where we talk to them about what they enjoyed, what they didn't. It's a tough thing interviewing someone, right? Because you want them to tell stuff without you having to ask them about it. You don't want to, yeah. You get what I mean?
You don't want to lead the witness, if you will.
But yeah, so it's based on, okay, we know that this person plays so many of this genre of games, like let's say like ARPG games. Like, they play so many ARPGs. They've enjoyed these games that are games that we try to make our game like, and this is their feedback. So like that's how important that now we can gauge like, okay, we know that they kind of know what they're talking about, so maybe we should listen to them a bit in that regard. But it's also just as valuable, I would say, that like someone that doesn't have as much experience, that they're trying this game and they're coming at it with fresh eyes, right? And that is still a valuable viewpoint to get on your game. So yeah, it just depends on the kind of person that that's playing the game. We see that feedback. It's a nuanced thing for like how strongly we listen to that feedback. And I will say ultimately, again, there's that thing that often happens is that players will talk about a game they're testing in terms of other games that they are playing and enjoy. And that's useful, but sometimes that's not the game that you're trying to make, right? And it's important to recognize like, okay, I need to not make all the sacrifices and end up making another Minecraft. You know, I want to like keep my game the way that I want to. I want to make this interesting. Yeah, bit of a balancing act.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and a bit of a weighted average balancing act, or just honestly throwing it all out the window and creating the first cozy Souls like. I think that's really where where the team needs to focus their time and effort on.
It's because we're especially later on in the process we're running playtests more frequently. We're getting feedback. We get a history of feedback, right? And we figure out like, okay, this feedback hasn't changed in several playthroughs, so we need to do something a bit more drastic to address that.
Gotcha. Okay, that's also very interesting because you're not just looking at this slice of playtesting, but how does that go from the past ones, or was there a lot of complaints about, let's just call it the platforming, and that's decreased over time, meaning like, hey, we're doing something right on that perspective. I'm sure that you guys have a ton of G Sheets or Excel or wherever you kind of storing all of this type of information.
Yeah, I will say the backbone of the studio is just Google Drive and our Excel, Google Sheets, or Google Docs. There's a lot of them.
If you could take one thing that you've learned and like pass that along to every indie dev to help them with their game production, like what would that be?
One thing, geez, from my time at Drinkbox, I would say there's a pervasive philosophy of focusing on good enough for now. There's definitely many things that we're working on even now where we could make things better. We could implement a more dynamic workflow, or we could give players more options, or like expand things in like interesting ways for the player to experience all these things like early on. It's like, don't focus on what's good enough for now, because that's what ends up getting games made. Drinkbox is a pretty old studio at this point, and like they have experience in getting games made, which I think is ultimately probably one of the most important lessons in making sure you have a career in indie games. But yeah, I would say outside of that, time management is important, but it's a tricky thing, and I guess know that it's a tricky thing. It's good to be aware of. And I think the last thing I want to say, especially to the solo developers, and this might feel contradictory to the other things that I was saying, but if you're doing this as a passion, if you're doing this because like you care about it, which often indie game developers are, don't be afraid to let that passion guide you. And look, you can produce around this as well. You can like scope around this, but it's important to have those times when you have that spark of passion of something that interests you. You have like all those ideas, and it's good to like not worry about the schedule so much. Maybe give yourself a month, and be like, I'm just going to explore some ideas and try a lot of things out. Let that passion drive you, because it's also very easy to lose that passion, to lose that energy if you're constantly micromanaging from the start. And yeah, energy management is an important thing, especially for a solo developer. That's how you avoid that burnout.
Absolutely. You cannot ride only motivation. Right. And I think it's understanding that balance of sometimes you're going to need motivation. Many times you're just going to need discipline. But other times it's like having a structure, having a like something to fall back to and knowing, OK, this is what I'm going to work on. Perfect. But then when inspiration strikes, it also is great to be able to, OK, you know what, like I'm going to push that off for a second because like I'm ready to, and I'm excited to work on this specific thing. Josh, anything else that we missed that you wanted to double click on, touch on, expand upon more that you can kind of think about in this scope, or something that really Drinkbox does?
Sure. I think one thing, a tangent that I wanted to come back to is just like I know we talked about data in terms of playtesting and like making your game. But really, I want to say that there's data in everything we do, from like production to marketing. It's and even art really like has references that we know that we use to quantify. But especially talking about like production and marketing, I feel like a lot of initially that felt like very mystical to me, like how often am I putting my game on sale? What social media platform should I put my game on? And you'll find people online that can help you, guide you towards some of those answers as well. But really, something we do at Drinkbox is like we look at what other studios do. We look at, this studio for this game. What are their most active social media platforms versus this studio? Like, it's interesting how diverse an answer that is as well. It's specifically in that example for things like marketing. If you're trying to figure out like how often, like let's say you're making a game, like what price points should I sell my game at? Yeah, how frequent am I going to be discounting my game? When should I release my game? There's a lot of data out there that'll tell you things like, yeah, all these games are this price. These games go on sale, at this rate for this amount of discounts. There's a Wikipedia page that's just like all the game releases that's going to be happening next year. And you can figure out like, okay, I see a slot there for my game to come out. If you're a studio of the size that cares about that. Yeah, there's really a lot of information out there to help with any stage in production, really. You should rarely feel like you're making things up completely fresh, unless you want to, I guess.
That's so awesome. And then is the team, I'm guessing this is something that the team obviously takes seriously, but like consistently looking at and making sure that the marketing of the game is going to be aligned? Or is it like, okay, we're starting this project, we're getting to a point where we're going to start promoting it, now let's look at what platforms are teams using and how are they posting? What's the style that's kind of working right now in today's social media meta, if you will?
I would say it is something we look at reasonably frequently. Obviously, in an earlier part of our games development lifecycle, we don't have a lot of marketing that we do because there's nothing much that we can talk about. But I mean, hey, from looking at what other studios do, some studios do involve people really on, right? Like I'm thinking about like Aggro Crab, famously, even Landfall. I feel like those are studios, if you go to their TikTok pages, they're constantly showing in development snapshots and like they're getting feedback from the community for like features and things to add. And like, hey, like why are they doing that? How does that work for them? Like, because they make it work, right? And some game developers don't. Some games don't lend themselves to that kind of marketing. But yeah, we're constantly looking at it. We're constantly being aware, constantly trying to be aware of like what are these louder voices in the game marketing space? Like what are the people that like rise from the noise of all the gaming news, and how are they doing that? We also we work with a PR agency, Pop Agenda, specifically. Shout them out, is typically who we go to. We worked with them extensively for Nobody Saves the World. And yeah, they also help. They're also aware of like the kind of game that we're making and how best to talk about that on the different platforms. Marketing your game is important. And again, there's lots of information out there for how best to do that.
Yeah, and I know we spoke about it earlier. It's like there's always the how best, but there isn't also one answer, right? And like you were talking about, you can look at 10 different games and you'll kind of get 10 different ways of going about it, and just kind of finding what works for you, and also, yeah, what works for your game and the style of your game as well is very, very important. But doing that initial research and not just sending out a tweet and being, hey, why aren't people wishlisting? But okay, this is the style of game. This style of game probably works better on this platform. Here's how people who succeeded on this platform did it. Like, there's so many layers that you can kind of dig in and dive in on.
I'll even say that sometimes we research almost in the opposite direction for marketing, in that it could surprise you how little some studios are doing in terms of their marketing, because sometimes they're in that early stage of development. And you're trying to see like, okay, I'm in my early stage of development and I don't want to do a lot of marketing. Are there other studios in that situation? What are they doing? Are they still posting? Are they not? So, it's useful to get that data, not just to figure out like, okay, how do I hype up my game to the max? Sometimes it's useful to figure out, okay, this is what I should be doing in this stage of development. This is how I make sure what I'm doing is sustainable, that I'm like not overexerting myself and trying to be the best at everything all at once.
Again, I think this can definitely be its own its own podcast topic for another day, absolutely. But until then, I know Josh, this has been absolutely fantastic. So I do want to first off ask you just where can the audience find you, or just kind of follow along of what's coming up next for
For Drinkbox, I'd be remiss not to shout out our Discord. I know we tend to be quite quiet over there because we tend to have a small team that has a lot on their plate. We don't have a dedicated community manager. We do see everyone there, though. We do see everyone's posts. We love all the interactions that we get there. But, I think we're a big enough studio as well that, like, if you follow us in any measure, we will always make sure you get any of the news that we want to share. For myself, where am I active? I feel I don't know if I am super active on social media. Maybe Instagram, JD2895 is your best bet. Honestly, more often than not, because I do end up helping Drinkbox quite a bit with social media. So honestly, if you comment on your TikToks or on Discord, chances are I'm going to be the one that's responding to you. So, that's one way.
Amazing. Once again, a man with many hats going on. So I'll post those ones in the episode description as well for anyone who wants to follow along, both Josh / the company accounts that most likely are going to go to Josh as well. Amazing. And then lastly, Josh, we always look to pay it forward here on Freaking Cool Indies. So before I can let you leave, I do want to ask if there is any indie game or any studio or upcoming one that is just getting you really excited, and give you an opportunity to kind of shout them out and shout them from the rooftops.
I mean, I feel like I need to. I love. I don't know if you've heard of Co-op Studios. They made Goodbye Volcano High. I think was there.
Oh yeah,
nice.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, fascinating studio. I think I know just one, kind of two people that work there, and it's great because they're like an indie studio that's changing, that's like innovating. One of the many indie studios that's innovating what it means to be a working indie studio. Their name is Co-op because they are a co-op, and like they have a very different work style. They have like 40 work weeks. They have I'm trying to think of like all these other things that friends been telling me, but they're doing some interesting stuff, and they're also like making things with a lot of heart, which I think was awesome. And like that's how you really strike a chord with people. That's great.
That's wicked. I haven't actually. I've known about Goodbye Volcano High for many years. I think it was also they had a big release on one of the indie showcases, and or a video game award, something it was released. But I did not know about the co-op as a company and kind of what they're looking to do, and that's wicked to hear, especially in a climate, not just in the video game industry, but the entire work climate where it's often you hear about cramming and working late and all that type of stuff, and kind of having a studio that is more focused on the long term and the people aspect of it, I think is phenomenal.
I think they have spoken in various articles about how they work as well, and it's great to hear.
Amazing. I will definitely, I'll again include that in the show notes below for anyone who is of interest, because I know what I'm researching and reading for the rest of the night.
Yeah, because they're another. Sorry.
Well, Josh, no, please.
Sorry, because they're another Canadian studio as well, so it's nice to have that innovation happening so close to home.
I love it. So many incredible Canadian studios out there that I don't think too many people know about, there's obviously the easiest one I think to point to is it's not much of a studio, but Balatro, Canadian studio, but everything from Capybara and Co-op and Drinkbox Studios, and there's so many ones that you can name, and it's great to see. It really, really is. Well, my friend, I think with that, it is official. Josh, congratulations, sir. You are a freaking cool indie.
Thank you.
I got to get like a little, I still, every episode I talk about, I got to get like a little judge gavel or something, just to make it official. But it's okay. You are officially a freaking cool indie. And I appreciate you coming on. It's been an amazing talk. You brought us really behind the scenes of this, of how Drinkbox Studio does everything, but also how indie devs can kind of take that and incorporate it into their own development cycle. So again, I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time, and we do truly appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Happy to help in any way. And love what you're doing, man. Love that you're helping people, and hopefully, we get some more freaking cool indies out there.
Absolutely. There's plenty of them out there. We just got to keep finding them. All right, my friend, that is it for us. And once again, everyone listening, thank you very much for listening to another great episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.